Welcome to the Plain Books Podcast. Today, we're diving deep, really deep, into a book that, honestly, feels like a cornerstone for anyone in modern business leadership. It's execution, the discipline of getting things done.
And the authors, Larry Bossidy, Charan, Charles Burck, these aren't just theorists. These are heavy hitters.
Absolutely. Bossidy, former CEO of Allied Signal, then Honeywell, huge turnarounds.
And Charan. Well, he's the advisor everyone wants. He just gets organizations.
Yeah.
Together, they really tackle this idea that getting things done is maybe the biggest competitive edge you can have.
Yeah, it's funny because when this book first came out, strategy was sort of the glamorous part,
right.
The big thinking.
Right. Execution was seen as the nuts and bolts, something you hand off.
But Bossidy and Charan just completely flipped that. And that's our mission for the next hour or so, to show you why execution isn't just tactics. It's a discipline. It's a whole system. And crucially, it's something a leader absolutely cannot delegate.
And their core idea is pretty stark, actually. They say most big failures in companies, they're not because the strategy was dumb. They're because the company just couldn't execute the strategy.
That's the gap nobody knows they talk about.
Exactly. This huge gap between what leaders promise, to the board, to Wall Street, and what the organization is actually capable of delivering. It's a reality disconnect.
And the numbers they mention, well, they should make any leader pause. They talk about CEO turnover, specifically pointing out that in 2000 alone, 40 CEOs of Fortune 500 companies were removed.
40, and not retirement. Removed.
Right. Mostly because they just didn't hit the numbers they promised. It's like a flashing red light showing that the execution engine right at the top was sputtering.
Which is why we really want you, our listeners, to think of this podcast not just as hearing about a book, but as getting hold of a potential blueprint.
Yeah, maybe grab a notebook. Think about your own team, your own work. How do these ideas land for you? We're aiming to unpack the whole thing, give you practical stuff you can use, maybe even starting tomorrow.
Let these ideas really enhance your professional life. That's the goal.
Okay, so part one. What is execution, really? The book hammers this point. It's not just a tactic, it's a discipline. It has to be baked into the strategy, the goals, the culture.
Yeah, it's foundational.
So why can't the leader just hand off the how? Why is that substance non-delegable?
Well, because if you delegate the how, you're basically flying blind. You're working on assumptions, not what's actually happening on the ground. Bossidy really stresses this. A brilliant strategy is totally useless if your organization doesn't have the capability or, just as importantly, the culture to make it happen.
The leader has to be that link.
The central connection point between the strategy and the who and the how, the people and the processes. Without the leader driving that connection, it just falls apart.
And the book uses some really sharp case studies to show what failure looks like. Let's start with Joe. He's their archetype of a leader who, on paper, did everything right. Good consultants, big goals, empowered team.
Yeah, Joe sounds great, doesn't he? But he failed.
Why? What was the big mistake?
Joe saw his job as purely intellectual, like an architect drawing up plans. He set the big ambitious numbers and then just sort of handed them down. He expected his operations people to just figure out how to hit them.
Without getting involved in the how.
Exactly. The problem wasn't the stretch goal itself. It was the lack of real, honest conversation with the people who actually had to do the work, the ones who knew the real constraints, logistical, physical, whatever. Joe failed because he treated execution like some technical detail, not his main job. Intellectually there, but behaviorally absent.
Okay, then there's Xerox under Richard Tolman, famous flameout. He had the right vision, didn't he?
Right.
Transforming Xerox from just copiers to broader solutions.
The vision was spot on. The strategy seemed sound.
So why the spectacular failure?
Because he unleashed chaos without building the foundation first. He tried to do two massive things at once. First, centralize all the back office admin stuff globally to save money. Okay, huge job. Second, at the same time, completely reorganize the entire sales force to sell complex services instead of just boxes.
Wow. Either one of those is a monster project.
Right. Doing both simultaneously meant the systems weren't ready. The sales team, instead of selling the new solutions, was spending all its time fighting internal fires, messed up invoices, delayed orders because the admin consolidation was a mess. The system basically ate itself. The execution wasn't there to support the ambition.
It sounds like a complete failure to understand the organization's actual capacity for change.
Precisely. which contrasts with Lucent Technologies under Richard McGinn. They were kind of blinded by their past success.
Right. Bell Labs, heritage, booming market.
Yeah, McGinn was a great marketer, selling that story, promising incredible growth. But they fundamentally failed the capability assessment. They were way too slow developing the next generation of crucial products, things like optical gear, high-end routers. That's what the market was demanding.
But McGinn didn't want to hear it.
He seemed to be in denial. He kept setting these super aggressive financial targets, apparently ignoring warnings from his own engineers and operations people that the key products just weren't ready. And this makes a really critical point the book drives home. When you fail to execute on something fundamental, like product development,
It becomes a strategic failure.
exactly, it blinds you to what's really happening in the market. You're selling a future you can't actually deliver.
Okay, so those are examples of execution failure dragging down strategy. But then they use Dell to show the flip side, how execution creates strategy, that velocity advantage they had over Compaq.
Oh, it's a brilliant contrast. It's the difference between trying to predict the future and just reacting incredibly fast to the present. Compaq was doing traditional manufacturing, build big batches based on forecasts.
Which is risky in the PC market.
Hugely risky. Component prices plummet constantly, so any inventory Compaq held was losing value by the day or becoming obsolete. Massive write-offs were inevitable.
Whereas Dell,
Dell mastered the execution of build-to-order. They didn't spend a dime on components until they had a paying customer's order in hand.
and the results of focusing so intensely on the how are just staggering.
Aren't they? Dell turns its inventory something like 80 times a year. 80. Their rivals. Maybe 10, 20 times.
That speed creates cash.
Massive cash flow. And get this negative working capital, which basically means they collect cash from the customer before they even have to pay their suppliers.
That's an incredible advantage.
It's almost unbeatable structurally. Dell is essentially using customer money to fund its operations. And the point is, this wasn't some magic strategy idea pulled out of thin air. It was the relentless, day in, day out, rigorous execution of every single step, supply chain, assembly, distribution. That operational discipline became their killer strategy.
So to round out this part, let's touch on Dick Brown's success at EDS. They were kind of stuck, right? Indecisive, siloed.
Yeah, EDS had lost its way, lots of fiefdoms, no real accountability. Brown came in and didn't just shuffle boxes on an org chart. He attacked the execution problem head on.
How?
He had to change the culture, fundamentally. He brought in energy, focus, set a clear agenda. He reorganized to smash those silos. And he demanded real rigor in hitting goals people initially thought were impossible.
He did just set the goals. He demanded the plans to reach them.
Exactly. He got into the how. Brown's turnaround shows that execution is the engine of transformation. Fix the culture, fix the operating processes, demand discipline, and the results can follow, often much faster than anyone expects. He turned EDS around in just a couple of years by focusing relentlessly on execution.
Okay, that relentless focus brings us nicely to the core structure. The book lays out the 3 essential building blocks for execution.
Right. These are the foundations you absolutely have to get right if you want any strategy to actually work.
Building block 1,
Yeah.
the leader's personal role, deep involvement.
Yes, and this is key, distinguishing between just presiding over things versus actively leading.
Presiding is kind of watching from the stands.
Pretty much. Observing, maybe offering high-level comments. Leading, in the execution sense, means you're down on the field, you're probing, asking tough questions, getting into the details, but crucially, without micromanaging. It's about active, relentless curiosity about how things really work.
And maybe the most important thing that comes out of that involvement is insisting on realism.
Oh, absolutely. Realism is the heart of execution.
The Bossidy story from Allied Signal nails this. He looks at the internal numbers.
And everything looks great. 98% order fill rate. We're hitting the target. Pat ourselves on the back.
But the customer reality.
A disaster. 60%. The real number, what customers were actually experiencing, was terrible. The organization was so busy measuring itself internally, using metrics it could control and make look good.
That it was completely ignoring the painful truth from the outside.
Exactly.
Right.
An execution-focused leader has to measure externally. Bossidy didn't just read reports. He went to the facilities. He talked to operators, middle managers, asked them straight up, what are we doing right? What are we messing up? That constant, direct reality check is the only way to find that gap nobody knows.
And knowing the reality helps with the next critical leadership job. Setting clear priorities. The book is pretty blunt here. If you have 10 priorities.
You have 0 priorities.
Right.
The leader has to force the organization to focus on a very small number 3 or 4, max, of absolutely critical, non-negotiable goals. Everything else is just noise.
They used the Lucent example again when they were facing collapse.
Yeah, in 2002, their priorities had to be crystal clear and brutal. Number 1, cash conservation, sell assets/costs, pay down debt, survival mode. Number 2, build a stable revenue stream. That intense clarity meant everyone, top to bottom, knew exactly where to put their energy. It allowed them to move fast and in sync.
Clear goals, though, are useless without relentless follow-through. This feels like where so many great ideas die.
It's the execution gap, again, the space between deciding something and actually getting it done across the organization. The anecdote about the CEO wanting to boost inventory velocity is perfect here.
Right, the purchasing manager says they need 20 engineers to speed things up.
And the engineering VP immediately pushes back, typical turf war stuff. My engineers won't report to purchasing.
But the CEO didn't let it become a debate.
Nope. The executing leader cut right through it, looked the VP in the eye, and said, effectively, you will transfer 20 engineers by Monday. End of discussion. But then, and this is key, he didn't just walk away. He set up a mandatory monthly video conference. Himself, purchasing, engineering, finance, manufacturing, everyone involved, forced to report progress and solve problems together.
So follow-through isn't just giving an order.
It's immediate, decisive action, plus a formal mechanism to track progress and ensure accountability. No wiggle room.
Okay, the last part of the leader's role is coaching for capability. This sounds hard, especially with difficult employees.
It requires real emotional fortitude, especially when you've got someone who delivers great results but is, well, toxic.
The Charlie example.
Yeah.
Hits his sales numbers, makes money.
But he's a nightmare boss. Works his team into the ground, yells, creates this awful, unsustainable environment. The leader has a tough choice. Ignore the bad behavior because the numbers look good short term.
Or confront it for the long-term health of the team and the company.
An executing leader has to confront it. And not vaguely. The book emphasizes using specifics. Charlie, I have a log here with dates, examples of complaints, then setting clear expectations. I'll help you, I'll coach you, but this behavior has to change, or you don't have a future here.
That takes guts.
It does. But that courage is what builds a genuine performance culture. If you let the toxic star succeed, everyone sees that results justify bad behavior. Coaching, even the tough conversations, is how you ensure success is sustainable and, frankly, ethical.
That leads perfectly into the second building block, creating a culture of execution. They call it the social software. And they argue culture isn't fuzzy, it's about behavior.
Yeah, this is a core insight. Forget inspirational posters. Culture change happens through action, as they put it. We don't think ourselves into a new way of acting. We act ourselves into a new way of thinking.
So you change the routines, the measurements, the rewards.
And that changes how people think and behave. You operationalize the culture change.
They talk about the from what to what exercise. You can't just say, be more collaborative.
Right, that's too vague. You have to get specific, like, we need to move from a culture where my peer is my rival and I hoard information to a culture where collaboration is essential and information flows freely. Define the specific behavioral shifts you need.
And how do you make those shifts stick?
Through social operating mechanisms, or SOMs, these aren't just random meetings. They are the structured, regular interactions, could be formal reviews, could be informal huddles where the new behaviors are explicitly practiced, discussed, and reinforced. Critically, they have to be integrative, pulling people together across different functions to break down those silos.
GE's system is the benchmark they use. CEC, Session C, S1, S2. Sounds complex. How does it drive execution?
It's the interconnectedness and the relentless cycle of review. The Corporate Executive Council, CEC, sets the big picture. That flows into S1, the strategy review. But then comes the crucial part. Session C, the talent review.
Which isn't just HR.
Not at all. It's a rigorous, often multi-day meeting where senior line leaders intensely debate each other's people. They scrutinize assessments, challenge assumptions about potential, figure out who needs development. It forces objectivity about talent.
And that feeds directly into operations.
Directly. The output of Session C, who's ready for what, who needs coaching, immediately informs S2, the operations planning process. So you're directly linking your strategy S1 to the people capable of delivering it, Session C output, and then building the operational plan, S2, around that reality. It forces leaders to be deeply engaged and realistic about resources and capabilities constantly.
And the fuel for all these SOMs, these mechanisms, is robust dialogue.
Absolutely essential. If the dialogue isn't robust, the whole system clogs up.
What does robust dialogue look like?
It requires candor, openness, even a degree of informality so people feel safe speaking up. Bossidy's mantra sums it up. Truth over harmony.
Truth over harmony. Powerful.
Because if harmony is the goal, avoiding conflict, letting people save face, keeping things polite, what you get is silence. You get people nodding in the meeting and then doing something completely different afterwards. The pocket veto.
Ah, the pocket veto.
Yeah.
Seen that happen.
We all have. Someone disagrees but doesn't have the guts to say it, so they just quietly sabotage the decision later. Execution demands an environment where people feel not just permitted, but actually rewarded for challenging assumptions, even the CEO's assumptions, if they have data or a valid reason. Candor surfaces reality.
Which brings us to the third non-delegable building block, the right people in the right place. You mentioned Bossidy spending 30–40% of his time on this during turnarounds.
It's a staggering amount of time, but it shows the priority. He believed, and the book argues forcefully, that the quality, energy, and fit of your people is ultimately your only sustainable competitive advantage. Everything else can be copied.
And the big danger here is hiring for comfort.
Yes, it's so tempting for leaders to hire people who are like them, who agree with them, who won't rock the boat, people they feel comfortable around.
They mentioned Howard, the CEO who surrounded himself with loyalists.
And it ended in disaster. He built a team based on loyalty, not capability. When the market turned, his loyalty blinded him. He couldn't make the tough calls to remove people who weren't performing because they were his friends, his comfortable choices. The company eventually failed. Comfort is the absolute enemy of execution.
So how do you avoid that? By defining really clear, non-negotiable criteria for each role.
Exactly. Not just generic stuff. You need 3 or 4 absolute must-haves. They tell that story about the CEO looking to hire a chief marketing officer.
The candidate seemed great on paper. Very charming.
Right. But when Charan started probing, asking the CEO and the vice chairman to define the specific non-negotiables, like deep technical knowledge of integrating advertising and promotion, or a proven ability to execute complex programs on a tight timeline, it became clear. The CEO admitted, actually, I don't really know if she can do that. They'd been swayed by the resume and the personality, not the hardcore evidence of execution capability. Leaders have to dig deep for that behavioral proof.
And that digging extends to reference checking. Bossidy wasn't just ticking a box here.
No way. He didn't rely on HR summaries. He insisted on making personal calls to people he knew and trusted who knew the candidate.
Why the personal touch?
Because he needed to drill down on specifics, energy level, how they actually implemented things, their work ethic under pressure. He'd ask things like, what really gets this person excited? Is it talking about the strategy, or is it the thrill of getting the product shipped? He wanted to sense their execution DNA. His rule was tough, but clear.
If I can't easily get a reference from someone I know,
I don't want to hire the candidate. It's about the leader taking personal ownership of vetting the execution skills of their key people. It's that important. Okay, so we've got the building blocks, the leader's role, the culture, the right people. Now we move into the machinery that makes it all work. The 3 core processes: people, strategy, and operations. And the key is, these aren't separate silos. They have to be deeply dynamically linked.
let's start with process 1, the people process. The book calls it the foundation. Why put it even before strategy?
Because ultimately, it's people who make the strategy. It's people who judge the market, make the trade-offs, and then turn those plans into reality. If you don't get the people part right, the best strategy in the world is just paper.
And the focus here isn't just current performance, right? It's about the future.
Absolutely. Succession planning, capability building.
Yeah.
It has to be about whether people can handle the demands of tomorrow's job, not just today's. The book points out that financial results are lagging indicators. By the time the numbers tell you someone's failing in a key role.
It's often too late. The damage is done.
Exactly, like that painful story about the Indonesian plant.
Oh, yeah, they took a star performer from Brazil.
A guy who had delivered fantastic results there and put him in charge of this massive, complex $250 million investment in Indonesia. Seemed logical reward success, give him a bigger challenge.
But the skill set was totally different.
Completely. Indonesia required navigating complex politics, dealing with regulators, managing huge contracts in a totally unfamiliar culture, skills he just didn't have despite his success in Brazil. The CEO waited too long, the project became a write-off, and they finally realized the people process had failed. It hadn't accurately assessed the future capabilities needed for that specific, different role.
So how do you get better at that assessment? They introduced the Leadership Assessment Summary, the LAS, often shown as that 3x3 grid.
Right, the performance behavior matrix. This is the tool that forces managers to look beyond just the numbers. You evaluate performance, did they hit their targets? But just as critically, you evaluate their behaviors. How did they hit those targets? Do they align with the company's values and the culture you're trying to build?
Like the lone wolf salesperson example.
Perfect example. High performer, hits the numbers every quarter. Great. But behaviorally, terrible. Hoards information, refuses to collaborate, doesn't mentor junior people.
So if the strategy shifts towards team-based selling,
That high performer suddenly becomes a major liability because their behavior doesn't meet the new requirement. The LAS flags this. It forces a conversation. Can we coach this person? Do they need to move to a different role? Or maybe they don't fit anymore. It also helps you spot the real stars, high performance and strong alignment with desired behaviors so you can fast-track their development.
and these individual assessments feed into the big talent review sessions, the MRRs. How are these different from just standard annual reviews?
Oh, they're way more intense and, crucially, more objective. These are often multi-day, cross-functional meetings, a dedicated SO just for people. Bossidy was ruthless about demanding candor here. He hated appraisals that were all syrup but no citrus,
Meaning,
meaning appraisals that just said nice things, doing great, but didn't identify any real development needs. His point was everyone has development needs, even your top stars. If the appraisal didn't list any, he'd reject it.
and the cross-functional part is key for objectivity.
Absolutely. You have multiple leaders in the room who've seen the person operate in different contexts. One manager's bias gets balanced out by others' observations. You get a much more rounded, objective judgment about someone's actual capability, their potential, and what specific development they need. It strips away the "he's my guy" kind of thinking.
And getting that clarity on performance and potential allows for real reward differentiation.
You have to. If everyone gets roughly the same bonus or the same stock options, regardless of contribution or future potential, you kill motivation. It becomes socialism, as the book puts it, and that undermines a performance culture.
So rewards need to be clearly linked.
Rigorously linked. Maybe a solid, reliable veteran performer gets a good cash bonus for hitting their numbers this year. But the bulk of the stock options, the long-term incentives, should go to the high-potential leaders who are expected to drive future growth. It sends a clear signal about what the organization values most, delivering today and building for tomorrow. Options shouldn't be an entitlement based on tenure. They should be tied to future impact.
Okay, let's shift to process 2, the strategy process. This is where we connect the big ideas to concrete actions. How do they make strategy actually executable?
By breaking it down, a good strategy needs to be translated into a small number, maybe half a dozen or fewer, really clear building blocks, actionable chunks.
Like the auto parts maker example.
Yeah, their winning strategy had 3 core pillars executed simultaneously. 1, become the low-cost producer through global consolidation. 2, differentiate through superior technology to justify higher prices. 3, create a new organizational structure to support the first 2 goals. Because it was broken down like that, they could assign owners, set metrics, allocate budgets for each block. It became tangible.
But even a clear strategy can fail if you miss the how. Back to that manager with the $300 million plan.
Oh, that story is chilling because it's so common. The plan looked brilliant, market analysis, financials, everything. But the CEO killed it with one simple line of questioning.
The $300 million question.
Right. The manager said his customers were purchasing managers. The CEO pushed. Okay, but who specifies the part? Who decides which part gets designed in? The answer was the engineers. The CEO asks, so how many engineers did you actually talk to when developing this plan? Dead silence. The manager had based his entire $300 million plan on talking to the people who signed the POs, not the people who actually decided what to buy. He completely missed the critical execution step, understanding the specifier's needs. It was a massive failure of reality testing, driven by internal assumptions.
Just incredible. Leaders also need to manage that tension between short-term results and long-term bets. The earnings holiday problem.
Yeah, the classic hockey stick plan. A manager comes in and says, okay, earnings are going to be flatter down for 3 years while we invest heavily in this big new thing, but then, boom, they'll shoot up.
Sounds plausible, sometimes necessary.
It can be, but the executing leader has to challenge it immediately. Okay, fine. But who's going to make up the earnings shortfall for the next 3 years? We can't just accept flat results.
You force them to find the money elsewhere.
Exactly. It forces innovation now. Maybe they need to accelerate cost-cutting in another division. Maybe sell a non-core asset, maybe find productivity gains they hadn't thought of. It imposes discipline, ensuring that long-term dreams don't become an excuse for short-term coasting.
And sometimes the discipline is knowing what not to pursue, even if it looks shiny. The Allied Signal flat screen story.
That's a great example of strategic discipline rooted in execution reality. Their R&D lab accidentally comes up with potentially breakthrough flat screen technology. Huge market, right?
Massive. Seems like a no-brainer to jump in.
But Bossidy made the tough call. License the technology, don't try to build it ourselves. Why? Because he realistically assessed Allied Signal's capabilities. They didn't have the deep, specialized manufacturing expertise, the process discipline, the culture needed to compete head-to-head with the established Japanese and Korean giants in that specific field. A great market opportunity isn't great for your company if you can't realistically execute better than the incumbents. Knowing your execution limits is critical.
Okay, finally, process 3. The operations process. This is the engine room, right, where it all comes together annually.
This is the synchronization engine. It answers the Oskaloosa problem.
Oskaloosa.
It's a metaphor. Headquarters might have the grand strategy, the overall budget, but the folks actually doing the work metaphorically in the plant in Oskaloosa, Iowa, need the detailed map and the weather report for the year ahead. The operating plan is that map. It translates the multi-year strategy into concrete one-year targets, which products launch when, specific productivity improvements, inventory goals, cash flow milestones. It connects the big vision to the quarterly realities.
And before you lock down that annual plan, you have to rigorously debate the assumptions.
Crucial step. You can't just plug in numbers. You need robust dialogue around the what-ifs. What if our biggest customer goes bust? What if raw material prices spike? What if demand suddenly doubles? Can our supply chain actually handle it? What if R&D needs an extra $5 million? Where specifically does that money come from?
It forces contingency planning.
And realism. It surfaces weak spots before they blow up. It also forces people to look beyond their immediate customer to the customer's customer, to understand end market demand and avoid getting caught with useless inventory if the final consumer stops buying.
And this process needs to be flexible, adaptable, like Honeywell's response after 9/11.
Textbook example of rapid adaptation. The aerospace market basically evaporated overnight. The leadership team met immediately, scrapped the existing plan. They knew high-margin aftermarket services would plummet. They calculated a likely $1.2 billion revenue hit.
So the goal shifted instantly.
Instantly. Forget profit growth. The new non-negotiable target was massive cost-cutting $500 million just to try and keep earnings level with the previous year. And critically, they decided not to bet on a quick recovery. They planned for the worst-case scenario.
Which gives you resilience.
Exactly. If things turned out better, great. If they didn't, they were prepared. That realistic, fast adaptation comes from having a robust operations process already in place.
And adapting often means making tough trade-offs, deciding what gets funded and what gets cut.
This is where disciplined companies really shine. They don't just slash budgets randomly when times get tough. Companies like GE or Colgate, mentioned in the book, build productivity into the system. They consistently find savings like $37 million saved in one division through better processes.
And that money doesn't just disappear into the general pot.
No, it gets explicitly reinvested into future growth, funding a new product, entering a new market. Productivity becomes the engine that funds innovation. It creates a virtuous cycle, ensuring you don't have to sacrifice the future every time there's a short-term dip. Execution actually generates the fuel for strategy.
So when you link people, strategy, and operations this tightly, you build incredible organizational muscle. Everyone knows the goals, who owns them, what the assumptions are, how progress is tracked. There's a shared understanding of reality and a practiced ability to adapt. That's the power of disciplined execution. So if we try to pull this all together, these three core processes, people, strategy, operations, they can't be treated like separate departments or sequential steps. They have to be woven together, constantly interacting, like gears meshing.
Exactly. A strategy discussion reveals a need for new skills. That immediately triggers the people process. Do we have those skills? Can we build them? Which then informs the operations process. How do we budget for the training or the hiring? It's this constant dynamic feedback loop, all driven by that culture of candor and realism we talked about. That integrated system is the discipline of execution. It's really a whole new way to think about leadership.
And it creates that sustainable competitive advantage.
Absolutely.
It's clear, though, that execution isn't some checklist you complete. It's ongoing, intense work It demands constant involvement from the leader.
Definitely. The authors pose that challenge near the end. Are you, as a leader, actually growing in your role or just swelling? Getting bigger, more important, but maybe more insulated.
Losing touch with the ground truth.
Right. Are you staying curious? Are you still close to your people, listening, learning? Or are you getting too high and mighty to really hear what's going on? That self-awareness is crucial.
Which leads perfectly to the final, provocative thought they leave us with. Find a confidant.
Yeah, someone completely outside the business. Someone wise, objective, who you trust implicitly, who can give you that unvarnished, candid feedback about yourself and how you're really doing, a personal reality check.
So the question for you, listening now, is, who is that person for you? Do you have someone like that? And maybe more importantly, when was the last time you actually had that tough, honest conversation?
Because without that external mirror, it's incredibly easy to fall into that gap nobody knows, to think you're executing brilliantly when maybe you're not.
A powerful thought to end on. We strongly encourage you to grab a copy of Execution, The Discipline of Getting Things Done by Bossidy, Charan, and Burck. Honestly, it's essential reading if you're serious about turning ambitious goals into actual results.
Absolutely. And engage with the ideas. Maybe even reach out to the authors or discuss it online. It's worth grappling with.
Thank you so much for diving deep with us today on the Plain Books Podcast.
It's been a great discussion.
If you found this valuable, please follow, subscribe, and maybe share this podcast with a colleague, perhaps someone who's struggling to close their own gap. Nobody knows. We'll see you next time.